Have you ever stopped to think that Doctor Strange's greatest secret was never the fact that he saw over 14 million possible futures, but the one future he never told the Avengers about? Because the more you look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a whole, the harder it becomes to believe that its biggest events happened by accident. What if every devastating loss, every impossible sacrifice, every shocking twist, and even every mistake that nearly destroyed the Avengers was actually part of a path that Strange knowingly allowed to unfold? At first, that sounds impossible. After all, Infinity War and Endgame were built around chaos. Heroes failed. Half the universe disappeared. Entire civilizations vanished in an instant. But when you connect one event to another, instead of looking at them individually, something unexpected begins to emerge. Every major turning point seems to trigger the next one with almost frightening precision. It starts looking less like history and more like a carefully arranged sequence of dominoes. And once that idea gets into your head, it's incredibly difficult to ignore. Because suddenly Doctor Strange no longer feels like someone reacting to events. He starts looking like the only person who already knew where the story had to go. The strange part is that Marvel quietly planted the foundation for this theory long before anyone realized it. To understand why, we have to go back to one of the most overlooked conversations in Avengers Endgame. It's a scene that most people remember simply because Bruce Banner meets the Ancient One. But the dialogue hidden inside that encounter completely changes how we understand Doctor Strange's decisions. Bruce arrives in 2012 with a simple mission. He needs the Time Stone. From his perspective, it's temporary. The Avengers will borrow the Infinity Stones, undo the snap, and then return every stone to the exact moment it was taken. Simple enough. Except the Ancient One immediately refuses. She doesn't hesitate. She doesn't negotiate. She explains that the Infinity Stones are not just powerful weapons. They are what keep reality itself flowing correctly. Remove even one stone from its rightful place, and the sacred timeline fractures. A new branch reality is born, and in that reality, the forces that Stone once protected against could consume everything. To her, giving Bruce the Time Stone isn't helping the future. It's risking an entirely different universe. At that moment, she isn't protecting the Avengers. She's protecting reality itself. Then Bruce asks a question so simple that it's easy to miss its importance. If removing the Time Stone is so dangerous, then why did Doctor Strange willingly hand it to Thanos? Everything changes the moment those words leave Bruce's mouth. For the first time, the Ancient One's confidence disappears. She looks genuinely surprised because she knows Stephen Strange. She knows the oath every Sorcerer Supreme takes to protect the Time Stone at all costs. Even before Strange officially inherited it, she already knew he would become its guardian one day. So hearing that he voluntarily surrendered, it doesn't make sense. In fact, it directly contradicts everything she believes about him. And yet Bruce isn't lying. During Infinity War, Strange repeatedly tells Tony Stark that he would rather let both Tony and Peter Parker die than give Thanos the stone. He makes that promise without hesitation, but only a short time later, he breaks it himself. Not because Thanos overpowers him, not because he has no choice. He simply looks into the future and changes his mind. The Ancient One doesn't argue with Bruce after hearing that. She immediately accepts that if Stephen Strange made that decision, there had to be a reason beyond her understanding. That tiny moment says something remarkable. Even Strange's own master believed he saw things no one else could. Now let's rewind even further. Back to 2012, during the Battle of New York. While Iron Man flies a nuclear missile into space, while Captain America commands the Avengers, while Loki invades Manhattan, Stephen Strange is nowhere near any of it. At that point, he's just a brilliant surgeon living an ordinary life. He hasn't lost the use of his hands. He hasn't discovered Kamartaj, he hasn't learned magic, he doesn't even know the Infinity Stones exist, yet somehow the Ancient One already knows his destiny. She knows that one day this ordinary man will inherit the Time Stone. She knows he'll eventually stand against cosmic threats that even she cannot fully predict. That's an incredible detail because it means Strange's importance wasn't created by Infinity War. It existed years before he ever entered the story. Marvel quietly tells us that Strange was always meant to become something greater than another superhero. He was destined to become someone capable of seeing reality itself from a perspective that nobody else ever could. That destiny reaches its peak during Infinity War. On Titan, Doctor Strange uses the Time Stone to search through 14,605 possible futures. It's one of the most famous scenes in the entire MCU, yet most discussions focus on only one number. One successful outcome. One chance to defeat Thanos. But here's the question almost nobody asks. What exactly counts as success? Tony Stark assumes success means killing Thanos. Peter Parker believes success means saving everyone. The Guardians want revenge. Every hero standing on Titan has their own definition of victory. But Doctor Strange never tells anyone what he actually looked for. He doesn't say, "I searched for the future where Thanos loses." He only says, "I saw one." That's an incredibly careful choice of words. One future, one outcome, one path. Those aren't necessarily the same thing. It's entirely possible that Strange wasn't searching for the fastest victory. He may have been searching for the only timeline where reality itself survives everything that comes after Thanos. If that's true, then suddenly, every heartbreaking sacrifice starts looking less like failure and more like a necessary cost. Think about what actually happens after Strange gives away the Time Stone. Thanos completes the Infinity Gauntlet. The snap wipes out half of all life. Millions of families are destroyed. Entire planets lose half their populations in an instant. For the surviving Avengers, it feels like the end of everything. 5 years pass. Hope disappears. Even the world's greatest heroes accept defeat. If Doctor Strange truly wanted to stop Thanos at any cost, this is the last future he should have chosen. Nothing about it looks like victory. Nothing about it looks heroic. And yet this disaster becomes the foundation for every event that follows. Without the snap, the story simply stops. That's where this theory becomes fascinating, because instead of asking why Strange allowed Thanos to win, maybe we should ask what would never have happened if Thanos had lost. The answer begins with someone nobody expected to matter: Scott Lang. While half the universe disappears, Scott happens to be trapped inside the quantum realm. Not because of a brilliant plan, not because someone rescues him, purely because of timing. 5 years later, a random rat accidentally walks across the controls of Luis's storage van and activates the quantum tunnel. It's one of the most unbelievable coincidences in the MCU. One tiny animal changes the fate of the universe. Scott escapes, discovers that only a few hours have passed for him, and realizes the quantum realm experiences time differently. That realization becomes the spark that creates the time heist. But look at the chain of events carefully. If Thanos never snaps, Scott is never trapped for 5 years. If Scott never returns, the quantum realm never becomes humanity's solution. Without the quantum realm, there is no time heist. Every one of those events depends entirely on Strange allowing Thanos to succeed first. And the consequences don't stop there. The time heist itself accidentally creates one of the most important events in modern Marvel history. During the mission in 2012, Loki escapes with the Tesseract. At first it seems like a mistake, just another complication during an already chaotic mission. But that single escape changes everything. Loki is captured by the TVA. He learns the truth about the sacred timeline. He discovers the existence of countless alternate realities. He confronts he who remains. Eventually, he makes the ultimate sacrifice and transforms into the god of stories, holding together the branches of the multiverse itself. None of that happens without his escape. And his escape only happens because the Avengers were forced into the time heist, which only exists because Scott returns from the quantum realm, which only happens because of the snap. Suddenly, what looked like disconnected movies become one uninterrupted chain of cause and effect. Remove just one link, and the entire structure collapses. Now ask yourself something even bigger. What if Thanos had actually been defeated on Titan? Tony Stark survives without sacrifice. Half the universe never disappears. The Avengers never lose 5 years. That sounds like the perfect ending, but underneath that happy ending lies an invisible disaster. Loki never escapes. The TVA never encounters the variant who changes everything. The sacred timeline remains under the control of he who remains indefinitely. The multiverse never reaches the point where it can evolve beyond his system, and perhaps most importantly, Loki never becomes the being capable of holding infinite timelines together. In other words, defeating Thanos immediately might have prevented a much larger future from ever existing. Strange may not have been protecting humanity from one villain. He may have been preparing reality itself for threats that hadn't even revealed themselves yet. That's exactly why later events begin to feel very different when viewed through this lens. In Spider-Man No Way Home, Doctor Strange once again makes a decision that appears reckless on the surface. He casts a dangerous memory spell for Peter Parker. The spell spirals out of control, fractures reality, and pulls visitors from other universes into the MCU. By the end of the film, Strange chooses another painful solution. He erases Peter Parker from everyone's memory, fundamentally rewriting countless lives to preserve reality. Once again, Strange accepts enormous personal loss in exchange for protecting something much larger. He doesn't always choose the outcome people want. He chooses the outcome the timeline seems to require, and when you place that beside Infinity War, Endgame, Loki, and the expanding Multiverse Saga, an unsettling possibility begins to emerge. Maybe Doctor Strange never selected the future where the Avengers simply defeated Thanos. Maybe he selected the only future where the multiverse itself could survive long enough to face the greatest threat still waiting beyond the horizon, a threat whose shadow seems to be leading straight toward Doctor Doom. Once Doctor Doom enters the picture, Doctor Strange's choices begin to make far more sense than they ever did before. Because Doom isn't just another world-conquering villain. He isn't someone who wants to collect Infinity Stones, wipe out half the universe, or rule a single planet. Doom represents something far more dangerous. Throughout Marvel Comics, Victor Von Doom repeatedly proves that his greatest weapon isn't raw power. It's preparation. It's patience. It's the ability to think 10 moves ahead while everyone else is reacting to the move directly in front of them. He's a scientist capable of rivaling Tony Stark, a sorcerer who has challenged beings far beyond Earth's understanding, and perhaps most importantly, someone obsessed with controlling reality itself. If Marvel is truly building toward that version of Doom, then Strange's famous line, "There was only one way," may have had nothing to do with defeating Thanos alone. It may have been the first move in preparing reality for someone who hadn't even appeared yet. Suddenly, the question isn't whether Strange sacrificed billions to stop Thanos. The question becomes whether he sacrificed billions because every other future eventually ended with Doom winning. That's an incredibly disturbing possibility. But once you start connecting Marvel's recent stories, it doesn't sound nearly as impossible as it once did. Think about how the Multiverse Saga has unfolded so far. Every project seems to introduce another crack in reality. Loki reveals the branching timelines. Spider-Man, No Way Home, tears open the barriers between universes. Doctor Strange, in the Multiverse of Madness, introduces incursions, collisions between universes that can erase entire realities from existence. Deadpool and Wolverine further confirm that universes aren't isolated anymore. They're overlapping, colliding, bleeding into one another. To many viewers, these seemed like separate stories building toward Kang. But after Marvel shifted its direction, something fascinating happened. Instead of feeling disconnected, all of these events suddenly started looking like ingredients. Every broken timeline, every collapsing universe, every magical anomaly, every scientific breakthrough, they all create the exact kind of unstable multiverse that Doctor Doom thrives in. Because Doom has never needed a perfect universe. He has always been at his most dangerous when reality itself is falling apart. Chaos isn't his weakness. Chaos is his opportunity. Now go back to Strange's vision on Titan and ask a different question. When he searched 14 million futures, how far did those futures actually extend? Most people assume he only looked far enough to see Thanos defeated, but the Time Stone never established a limit. Strange wasn't watching a 2-hour battle. He was observing entire timelines, entire futures, entire histories unfolding from a single decision. If that's true, then it's entirely possible he witnessed events years beyond Endgame. He may have seen Loki escaping with the Tesseract. He may have seen the TVA. He may have seen the sacred timeline collapse. He may even have seen incursions consuming entire universes. And somewhere beyond all of that, he may have seen Doctor Doom. Imagine the weight of that knowledge. Imagine watching 14 million civilizations rise and fall. Watching countless versions of your friends die, watching reality itself repeatedly collapse. Then discovering only one timeline where existence survives long enough to have a chance against what comes next. Suddenly handing over the Time Stone isn't surrender anymore. It's the first sacrifice in a much larger war. That idea also changes how we look at Strange's personality after Endgame. Compare the confident surgeon from his first movie to the man we meet in No Way Home and Multiverse of Madness. He's different, he's quieter, more cautious, more willing to make impossible choices that leave him personally devastated. Throughout Multiverse of Madness, we repeatedly hear one accusation directed toward him. You always have to be the one holding the knife. At first, it sounds like criticism of his arrogance. But what if it's actually describing the burden he's been carrying ever since Titan? Someone has to choose which future survives. Someone has to decide who lives and who dies. Someone has to carry knowledge that nobody else can understand. Every version of Strange we encounter across the multiverse seems haunted by that responsibility. Some become tyrants. Some destroy their own universes. Some lose everyone they love. The MCU's Strange may not be perfect, but compared to the countless broken versions we see, he appears to be the one still trying to protect the larger picture, even when every decision makes him look like the villain in someone else's story. There's another detail hiding in plain sight that becomes surprisingly important. During Infinity War, Strange never tells Tony Stark what the successful future actually requires. He simply says that if he tells him what happens, it won't happen. Most viewers accepted that as another time travel rule, but think carefully about what he's implying. Knowledge itself changes outcomes. The moment someone learns too much, their choices change, and the future changes with them. That's an idea Marvel keeps repeating. The TVA prunes timelines because different choices create different realities. America Chavez's powers connect infinite possibilities. Incursions happen because universes influence each other. Even Peter Parker's identity becomes dangerous once too many people know the truth. Information is never neutral in the multiverse, it shapes reality. That means Strange wasn't simply hiding a plan, he may have been protecting the timeline from the consequences of revealing the plan. Every secret he kept wasn't necessarily deception. It may have been another way of preserving the only future he believed could succeed. Now let's revisit some of the Avengers' biggest mistakes. Civil War tears Earth's mightiest heroes apart. At the time, it feels catastrophic. Iron Man and Captain America become enemies. Trust disappears. Friendships collapse. Then Thor leaves Earth searching for Infinity Stones. Hulk vanishes into space. Vision remains vulnerable. Wanda isolates herself. Looking back, these seem like disastrous decisions that left Earth defenseless when Thanos arrived. But imagine the alternative. Imagine the Avengers remaining united. They fight together from the very beginning. Perhaps they actually defeat Thanos before he collects every stone. That sounds like a better outcome, until you remember everything that would disappear afterward. No snap, no time heist, no Loki escape, no God of Stories, no multiverse capable of surviving beyond the sacred timeline. Suddenly, the Avengers' greatest failures begin to resemble necessary conditions. It's almost as if every painful fracture was another domino that had to fall before reality could reach the future Strange had chosen. This becomes even more compelling when you think about Loki himself. Before the Disney Plus series, Loki was known primarily as a trickster, a villain trying to prove himself worthy, a brother forever living in Thor's shadow. Nobody would have predicted that he would eventually become one of the most important beings in Marvel history. Yet that's exactly what happens. By the end of his journey, Loki willingly gives up everything he ever wanted, not a throne, not revenge, not recognition. Instead, he chooses eternal isolation so that every timeline can continue to exist. He literally becomes the foundation holding the multiverse together. That's not just character development, that's one of the biggest transformations in the MCU. And once again, it only becomes possible because of the exact sequence of events that Strange allowed to happen. If Strange truly witnessed that future, then perhaps he understood something no one else could. Thanos wasn't creating the hero who would save reality. Thanos was creating the circumstances that would. That completely changes the emotional meaning of Tony Stark's sacrifice as well. Tony believes he's giving his life to defeat Thanos. The audience believes the same thing. But if this theory is correct, Tony's sacrifice accomplishes something even greater. It preserves the timeline that eventually gives birth to everything that follows. His death isn't simply the end of the Infinity Saga. It's the foundation upon which the Multiverse Saga is built. That's a heartbreaking thought, because Tony never gets to know the full impact of what he accomplished. He dies believing he saved his family and the universe. He never realizes that his sacrifice may have protected realities he would never even live long enough to witness. In a way, Strange carries that knowledge alone. He watches Tony walk toward his fate without explaining why. It's one of the cruelest choices imaginable, but perhaps also the only one that ensured Tony would actually make it. And then there's one final piece that ties this entire theory together. Throughout the Multiverse Saga, Strange repeatedly warns that the greatest danger isn't magic itself or even powerful villains. It's incursions, entire universes colliding until both cease to exist. That's a threat far beyond anything Thanos ever attempted. Thanos erased half of life. Incursions erase reality itself. If Dr. Doom eventually learns to manipulate those collapsing universes, or worse, begins using incursions to reshape existence according to his own vision, then every decision Strange made since Infinity War starts looking less like a gamble and more like long-term preparation. Because defeating Doom won't simply require stronger heroes. It will require a multiverse that still exists long enough to fight back, and maybe, just maybe, that was the future Doctor Strange chose the moment he opened the Time Stone on Titan. If that's true, then one sentence from Infinity War suddenly becomes one of the most important lines in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. We're in the Endgame now. For years, audiences naturally assumed Strange was talking about the final battle against Thanos. Endgame even borrowed that line as its title, reinforcing the idea that this was the destination of the Infinity Saga. But what if Strange meant something much larger? What if Endgame was never the battle with Thanos at all? In chess, the endgame isn't the moment when the strongest piece attacks. It's the stage where every move made earlier finally reveals its purpose. Pieces that looked insignificant suddenly become essential. Sacrifices that seemed unnecessary suddenly make perfect sense. Looking at the MCU through that lens, Thanos starts to resemble the middle game, not the ending. The real endgame may have always been the multiverse itself, where every sacrifice, every loss, and every impossible decision finally converges against a threat unlike anything the Avengers have ever faced. That idea becomes even stronger when you remember that Strange has always been different from every other hero in the MCU. Tony Stark solves problems with technology. Steve Rogers leads through unwavering morality. Thor relies on strength and courage. Peter Parker follows his heart, but Doctor Strange has never fought battles the same way. From the moment he entered Kamar-Taj, he was taught that protecting reality sometimes means making choices that no one else will understand. The Ancient One herself broke the rules by drawing power from the Dark Dimension because she believed preserving the world justified the cost. Wong repeatedly keeps dangerous knowledge hidden because revealing it would create even greater risks. The masters of the mystic arts have never operated like traditional superheroes. They don't just protect people, they protect the structure of existence itself. That philosophy explains why Strange's decisions often appear cold or even selfish. He isn't choosing between good and bad outcomes. He's choosing between catastrophic outcomes and the one future where reality has a chance to survive. It also explains why Strange rarely tries to defend himself. Think about how many times other characters question his judgment. Tony Stark doubts him on Titan. Peter challenges him in No Way Home. Wanda blames him for everything that happened in Multiverse of Madness. Even alternate versions of Strange criticize each other across different universes. Yet the MCU Strange almost never reveals everything he knows. He accepts being misunderstood because explaining the entire truth could be more dangerous than staying silent. That's an incredibly lonely position to be in. Imagine carrying memories of 14 million failed futures, watching your friends die in countless different ways, witnessing civilizations erased over and over again, seeing universes collapse beyond saving, and then returning to reality, knowing you can never fully explain why you made the choices you did. Every smile, every conversation, every battle afterward would carry the weight of knowledge no one else shares. Maybe that's why Strange seems increasingly exhausted as the Multiverse Saga progresses. He's not just fighting monsters anymore, he's protecting a future that only he has truly seen. And that brings us back to the Ancient One, because her reaction during Endgame may be the biggest clue Marvel ever gave us. The moment Bruce Banner tells her that Doctor Strange willingly gave away the Time Stone, she stops arguing. She doesn't demand more evidence. She doesn't insist that Strange made a mistake. Instead, she immediately reaches one conclusion. If Stephen Strange chose that path, then it must have been for a reason she couldn't yet understand. Think about how powerful that moment really is. This is the Sorcerer Supreme speaking. A woman who spent decades guarding reality. A mentor who understood the dangers of time better than almost anyone. And yet even she accepts that her student may one day possess a perspective greater than her own. That's not just respect, that's trust. Marvel quietly tells us that Strange eventually surpasses the person who taught him everything. If the Ancient One could place that much faith in a decision she didn't understand, perhaps the audience should have questioned it much sooner as well. Of course, none of this is officially confirmed by Marvel. They have never stated that Doctor Strange intentionally guided every major event leading toward Doctor Doom, but that's exactly what makes this theory so compelling. It doesn't rely on rewriting the MCU. It relies on connecting events that already happened on screen. Strange really did surrender the Time Stone. The snap really did create the conditions for the time heist. Loki really did escape because of that mission. The TVA really did collapse into a branching multiverse. Loki really did become the god of stories. Strange really did cast another reality-changing spell in No Way Home. Incursions really are now the greatest threat facing existence. None of those events need to be invented. They're all established pieces of the MCU. The theory simply asks one question that changes how we view them. What if they were never isolated incidents? What if they were always parts of the same invisible chain? And if Marvel eventually reveals that Doctor Doom is the ultimate architect of the Multiverse Saga's conflict, then Strange's actions during Infinity War will become even more fascinating in hindsight. Imagine watching Avengers Infinity War years from now after Secret Wars has concluded. Instead of seeing a hero surrendering in defeat, you might be watching the first move in a strategy that spans decades of storytelling. Instead of witnessing failure, you could be witnessing preparation. Instead of seeing Strange lose the Time Stone, you might be seeing him protect a future so fragile that revealing it or even trying to avoid its painful moments would have destroyed it completely. That's the beauty of long-form storytelling. The meaning of old scenes can evolve as new chapters are added. Marvel has done it before, turning throwaway moments into major revelations years later. If they choose to do it again with Doctor Strange, it would instantly transform one of the Infinity Saga's most debated decisions into one of its smartest. There's another reason this theory resonates so strongly with fans. It gives purpose to pain. One of the biggest criticisms people often have about the Multiverse Saga is that it sometimes feels disconnected from the Infinity Saga. But if Strange's one future has been unfolding this entire time, then suddenly those stories become part of one continuous narrative. Tony's sacrifice matters even more. Natasha's sacrifice carries greater weight. Steve passing on the shield becomes another essential step. Loki's redemption feels destined rather than accidental. Even Peter Parker losing everyone who remembers him becomes another heartbreaking choice that protects a reality larger than himself. Every loss still hurts, but it gains a deeper meaning. The heroes weren't simply surviving random disasters, they were unknowingly preserving the only future where existence itself could endure. And maybe that's the real brilliance of Doctor Strange as a character. He's never meant to be the loudest Avenger. He's never meant to be the strongest. He's not even supposed to be the most inspirational. His role is far more difficult. He's the guardian who sees the consequences nobody else can see. He's forced to make impossible decisions long before anyone else understands why they matter. Every other hero gets to fight the battle in front of them. Strange has to fight battles years before they arrive. That's an enormous burden, and it's one that often leaves him looking wrong in the present, even if history eventually proves him right. In many ways, that's exactly what a master strategist does. The best plans rarely make sense while they're unfolding. They only become obvious once every piece has finally reached its place. So maybe the greatest secret Doctor Strange hid from the Avengers was never the number of futures he saw. Maybe it was the true destination of the future he chose. The Avengers believed they were fighting to stop Thanos. The audience believed the same thing. But Strange may have been protecting something far beyond a single war. He may have been preserving the one timeline where the multiverse could survive long enough to confront its greatest enemy. Whether that enemy turns out to be Doctor Doom, the collapse of reality itself, or something even bigger, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The MCU has always rewarded viewers who pay attention to the smallest details. And if this theory is even partially true, then one quiet decision made on Titan didn't just save the universe. It may have shaped the destiny of every universe that still exists. And honestly, that's what makes revisiting these movies so exciting. Every rewatch has the potential to reveal something that didn't seem important the first time. A single line of dialogue, a brief expression on a character's face, a decision that looked irrational in one movie but becomes perfectly logical years later. That's the magic of interconnected storytelling. It invites us to keep asking questions, to keep connecting dots, and to imagine possibilities hidden just beneath the surface. Whether Marvel confirms this theory or takes the story in a completely different direction, one thing remains undeniable. Doctor Strange has always been playing a game that nobody else fully understood. And if the Multiverse Saga eventually proves that every painful step since Infinity War was leading toward one final confrontation, then the Sorcerer Supreme won't just be remembered as the hero who saw 14 million futures. He'll be remembered as the man who quietly protected the only one worth fighting for. If you enjoyed this deep dive and want to see more cinematic Marvel theories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Filmcast. And if you really love the video and want to help support the channel, consider sending a 25 super thanks. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.